Thank you. Sorry. Yeah. So yeah, I'm here today to talk about Ansible, a server provisioning framework. I'm hopefully going to briefly cover why you might or should be using something like this, and to kind of take you through what would be your first step into using Ansible and getting into server provisioning. As Matt said, I am Ben Turner, Phantom Whale on Twitter. Primarily, I'm a Ruby dev these days, working in a team with quite a strong DevOps culture. Although we are mainly, I think, developers by trade, we try and do as much of ops stuff as we can. So hence, I've got into using Ansible in the last year. And I've been doing that at Aconex, who are, again, a Melbourne company, doing a lot of work in sort of construction and infrastructure industry. We got smart people, meetups, Friday drinks, that sort of stuff. And we are hiring. Okay, so the story so far. So firstly, who in the room is currently using any sort of server provisioning tool? If you put your hands up. Oh, quite a few of you. Who in the room is actually using Ansible in particular? Not so many of you. That's good. So it might be something worth learning here, and a few people who can probably heckle me when I get it wrong. So I'm going to run through briefly through a sort of not so hypothetical scenario, which many of you might be in, and certainly one we were in quite recently, where we have a server, just one server. We're quite a small app within the larger company. But our server's got quite a few things on it. Obviously, we've got Ruby on Rails, so I'm at RubyConf. We've got Apache running all our web stuff out the front end. We've got a little bit of Elasticsearch doing some of our search in the back end with custom config files. We've got users are in roles, standard server stuff. We've got a mail queue. We've got some cron tasks. We've got SSH keys. And that's only the kind of things I can remember off the top of my head. I'm sure there's a whole bunch of other small complexities that make up our production server. The problem we had, or the problem we could have faced, was all this knowledge is brilliant and very important, but it was all in the head of Fred, who is obviously the guy who's been with the team since the start, and Fred knows everything. So that's fine. Whenever we need to update the server, we can go back to Fred and say, hey, you know, what's kind of going on? What do we need to remember? What do we need to do? But Fred is a developer, and developers have three natural enemies. One is money. He might get offered some good cash dragged away. The number 73 bus is another problem you need to look out for all the time in development, which fortunately we didn't suffer from. But the last one, and probably most likely one, is he might just forget about some stuff. So we were aware of this problem. My bus has gone. Yeah, I don't know. Linux, weird. I'll heckle my own Linux. So yeah, we already aware of this problem, so we of course did what everyone should do. We documented all the things. We had a wiki page, we had shell scripts, little fragments of code, a few manual steps we documented. Seemed pretty good. Whenever we went to change server, of course, we would change the server, and then we would go onto our wiki page, we would detail and add in exactly what we did without fail, not once. Except we might have forgotten a couple of times. And basically, 3 years later, when we had to do a server upgrade, build a brand new server, we discovered the inevitable truth that documentation is a lie waiting to happen. No matter how well you think you've wikied, how well you think you've missed a small step out, or something that kind of worked when you're upgrading doesn't work when you're doing a fresh install. So we're going from Ubuntu 10 to 12, and yeah, we got about 80% of the way there, but yeah, it looked like we just basically have to start from scratch again. So we had, I think, what Martin Fowler coins a snowflake server, which is beautiful, it's wonderful, it does the job perfectly, but it's utterly unique, and you'll never manage to recreate it ever again. Anyway, so this is why my clicker's not working. So this is what brings us on to provisioning tools. So these are obviously, if you don't know, so provisioning tools are a way of having some executable code or configuration that's going to rebuild your server with the same software, the same configuration every time, so they can be identical. So in the space currently, there's 4 kind of main competitors, Ansible, Puppet, Chef, and SaltStack. Aconex actually primarily a Puppet shop. They've got some larger Java enterprise apps, they deploy with those. But as we're just a small set up with just a single Ruby on Rails app, I was pointed to Ansible and worth trying out. And I think we gave Chef a go for a while. There were knives, there were cookbooks, there was lots of grabbing things around. It seemed a bit overkill for what we're after. So we've settled on Ansible as kind of a simpler solution. But broadly speaking, they all do the same job. There are sort of 4 elements to all the software provisioning tools. Firstly, directives. Directives are telling some server to go and install something, to configure something, just simply run some sort of task. Directive script is a whole list of directives, which hopefully should take your server from bare bones to the state you want it to be in. And there will be master and slave nodes. Typically, the master node is the one that's driving out all the directive scripts, and the slave nodes are the ones you actually want to set up, the things you're trying to configure. And in Ansible, directives are called tasks. Directive scripts are called playbooks, kind of sportsy metaphor, don't know why. And here's one of the selling points there. The master node can be your own machine. You don't need to worry about going off and setting up a puppet master or a chef master. You can just use your own machine. And I mean, to this day, we still are. And the client node can just be any remote server you like. There's no client, no sort of special requirement there. So, Ansible, you decided it's worth a go. We're going to pick it up now. We understand the terminology. Let's get into it. Installing it's hopefully just a one-liner. Pip yum apt whatever package. I think there's a brew install as well for Mac. So it should just be a 1 or 2 line install. And once you put that in place, you'll have 2 executables. You'll have Ansible, which is what you use to run just basic tasks, and you'll have Ansible Playbook, which is what you'll use to execute entire playbooks. And we're going to look at both of those today. And on your client node, like I said earlier, you just need SSH. You don't need to go out and install any clients. Literally, once you've done your apt-get or whatever install package you use, you're ready to run against any client node because you only need SSH. There might be a little bit of Python you need as well, but you don't need to know about that. It's okay. It's under the hood. You'll never see it. It's on pretty much any server you're after. I think it only needs a very low level of Python. So as far as you're concerned, just SSH. The other thing you'll need is you'll need to tell your master node, probably your local workstation, about where all these client nodes are, where you're going to be installing. And you do that through a thing called an inventory file, which is just a simple list of servers and groups of servers that you're going to try and target. And there is a default location in etc Ansible, but you can have your own local file and just bring that in on the command line. And here is an example inventory file. So in the square brackets, you've got groups, and you can have servers living in multiple groups. So we've got web servers, databases, and primary servers here. And obviously all the things listed below are the names of the actual servers it's going to go and connect to. So it's fairly simple file format. Once you've got that, you're set up and ready to go. So you've installed Ansible, you've got your inventory file set up with all your client servers. Now it's time just to run a few command lines, check it's working, check you can connect. And the simple way to check you can connect is with ping, which is a very basic Ansible module. It's just going to go out there, check everything's functioning. You fire off that command. Ansible all says go and get everything out of my inventory file, just fire it at all the servers, and do this ping module, which hopefully, if you've set it up correctly, it should all come back and you get a nice green message saying success and a little packet of data, just ping pong. That data gets more useful when you run more useful commands. But if that works, you know you're ready to go and you can try other things. So the next thing you might want to try is just executing arbitrary command line statements. And you do this with the command module. So again, Ansible all -m command, and you just pass in with -a flag, whatever you want to do. So this is just going to go off and reboot all our machines, which is probably incredibly useful. The command thing is so useful, it's in fact the default. So you don't even need to, oh, there you go, I have a thing, module name arguments. But it's so useful, you don't even need to specify the command module if you're going to use it, because it's simply the default. So you can literally just write Ansible all, go off and run that stuff, and it'll do it. You may not want to connect as yourself. The chances are you won't have the same account on your server as you will locally. So there's a whole bunch of options you could pass in. You can tell it to log in as a different user. You can specify passwords. It's going to use SSH keys by default, but if you want to pass in a password, you can. You can run all the commands using sudo, and again, you can apply the sudo password if you need that. And you can even sudo to a non-root user if you need to again run as that. So, for example, if you want to Ansible up to your server as Bruce Wayne, but when you get there, you want to sudo up to Batman and execute the code, that will work. So, that's a way of just executing basic command lines. Next thing I want to talk about is modules. So we saw back there we were using the ping module and the command module. These are just basic modules you can use to run some arbitrary code. And just using again the basic command module, we could kind of log into the server and Also, I use Ansible to go into server and add a new user. So these are just 3 Unix command line options. Just going to add a user, add a group, and then make sure the new user's in the group. And if you run that command, it will come back and tell you 3 times, yep. Oh, am I actually coming through the mic? If you run that 3 times, it'll come back and say success SSS, which is brilliant, perfect. But the point of server provisioning is you don't run this once, you run it over and over again. The software needs to keep going back in and just double check you have got this user, it hasn't been adjusted, it hasn't been taken out of the group, I'll put it back in the group. And if you run this again, it's not so good because Unix goes, well, that's a failure, that user already exists. Unix throws an error, Ansible catches the error and then passes it back. You get the text that it's spat out as well as a failure command. So clearly this isn't the right approach. What we need is something more rerunnable, something idempotent, which we run over and over again and always get a sort of success result. So here we actually have a group module and a user module, and these are part of many, many core modules that I'll just cover in a second. And these are going to go away. In the arguments, you just pass name value pairs to say I want to create a group called admin, and I want to create a user who's going to be in that group. And this time you get back a nice success packet. You actually get back to extra data as well by using the module. It's going to return the GUID and other bits of information about the group you've just created. And when you run it again, the only thing that's going to happen is that change flag, rather than being true, is going to be false. So it's quite happy to say, yeah, that's already there. Here's the details if you didn't know it, but it was already there. I didn't have to do anything. So clearly, modules are a much better way, an idempotent way of running the sort of commands you need to set up your server. The command module is only there as a kind of fallback if there isn't a module to cover you. However, there probably will be a module to cover you because there is an absolutely huge list of core modules. Again, this is another kind of good selling point of Ansible that by default, with that single install, not going off to any extra repository to pull down any extra information, you end up with modules to do cloud stuff. So that's AWS, you've got Docker in there, database, MySQL, MongoPSQL, file manipulation, RabbitMQ for messaging, you've got New Relic, Nagios, PagerDuty, Get URL for grabbing network stuff. You've got Campfire, HipChat, Jabber, apt packaging, Yum, loads of things. So pretty much anything, any problem we've encountered so far, pretty much someone's already written a module for, with only a few exceptions. And when you do find an exception, you can roll your own sort of idempotency. So once again, using the command module, in this case, installing Elasticsearch. Now, Elasticsearch doesn't come in an apt package. I don't know why. So you have to download the Debian and install it with dpackage. And if you do that twice, you're definitely going to get an error. So you can use this creates clause here. And that just says, Ansible, at a very basic level, if you find this directory, we've already done this, so don't do it again. And by adding that in, you can run the command once, and it installs Elasticsearch, which is awesome. And then when you run it again, it just says, nah, skipped. That's fine. Don't need to do this again. And there's a removes flag as well, so if you've got a command that makes sure something's not present, you can put removes this so it doesn't keep trying to remove it over and over again. And if all of that doesn't work for you, you can roll your own. I haven't even looked into this, but in theory, you can roll your own modules. And they can be written in any language you like, because they just need to have these 2 kind of basic criteria of just accepting file input and spitting out stuff to stand it out. And there is a little GitHub project already out there for building them in Ruby. Again, I haven't looked at it. I can't imagine you probably will need to use it, but at least there's some Ruby content in my talk, and it's RubyConf, so it kind of felt like a good thing to have. Anyway, back to Ansible. So that's kind of a whiz through Ansible. I'm running it from a command line. That's what I played with for about half a day, and I was like, yeah, this seems to work, but now I need to write a proper script. I need to write a playbook. Something that's going to take my bare bones Ubuntu server and get it all the way to have all those things installed that we saw earlier. So to do that, we need playbooks. So yeah, this is, as I say in the documentation, modules are the kind of tools for building stuff up, and playbooks are your design plans. And they're very much designed to be configuration, not scripting kind of languages. There are a couple of loops and if-else constructs you could put in there, but primarily you're trying to write the configuration of your server and let the modules do all the kind of programmatic construction of it. So they should be quite clean. They're built in YAML, which I'm sure most of you know, sort of a configuration language. And you execute them using the Ansible Playbook command, and you just put the name of the playbook. Now, there are some command line switches there, but you'll notice we didn't bother specifying our user. We didn't bother specifying where we want to run this playbook. And one of the reasons for that is this is a small example playbook, but right actually at the top of your playbook, you'll say, this is for the web servers group, so run this against all my web servers in the inventory. And that's the YAML in this case where you just go log in as root, possibly not something you want to do as a system administrator, but it's quite an easy example. And then having sort of logged into all these servers as root, go ahead and execute the rest of this play. So I'm just going to cover the various sections of this to make them a bit more obvious. So first thing you'll find in the playbook in the middle, there's a large chunk of tasks. And tasks are literally as we're running on the command line. You have a task, you pick a module and arguments, and you can give it a nice description. The description's optional, but you should do it because it spits it out on the command line as it runs, and it keeps things nice and beautiful. But otherwise, it's exactly the same as we're just running a command line. In this case, we've got an apt module, which is just going to make sure a certain package has been installed on our machine. And it's pretty much equivalent to doing on the bottom what we saw earlier, so Ansible -m module, and then the argument. Most of the arguments for I think almost every module are just name value pairs, so x equals y with a space between. It's only the command module that doesn't follow that convention. So that's a simple task. After a while, some tasks you'll find yourself hard coding certain magic values like Ruby version and usernames and so forth. And also for various different servers, you might want to use different values for configuration files. So here, for instance, we're using in the task section, we're using a line in file, which is something you use quite a lot, which basically says go in this file, use a regex, find a certain line, and put in a new value there. And here we want to put in our Elasticsearch heap size, so we can use a variable, which in this case is ES heap size of 4 gig. So you can declare your variables at the top of your playbook and then substitute them in using this Ginger2 templating language, which I obviously like the name of. It sounds incredibly complex, but it's basically just double handlebars around the variable name, and that's it. There used to be a dollar notation, but that's pretty much been deprecated. Oh, and that's how the variable goes in there. Got to remember where I put my arrows. Another way you can define variables rather than putting straight into Playbook is you can define them on a per host or per group basis. So in this case, this is back in our inventory file. We've got our small group with these two, and we're saying in each of the hosts, I'd like to have a 1 gig Elasticsearch heap. So this could be our demonstration machine, which hasn't got a big load of memory, so we don't want to give it 4 gig because it's just going to out of memory everything else on the machine. Or more conveniently, you can do it per group. So obviously in this case, the two machines are in the same group, so we'll just define some group variables at the bottom. Say anything in a small group can have a 1 gig Elasticsearch heap size. Excuse me. Right, so another thing you might do with variables, rather than use them within your tasks themselves, you might have templates. Now templates are files like configuration files that are almost complete. They've just got a few variables that need to be substituted in. So again, at some point you'll run a task to say, could you bring me that template, substitute it in, and at that point it's going to figure out, well, what are my variables, what values should I put in. So there's another place you can use variables. So in this case, we've got Elasticsearch configuration file, and we're looking for the heap size and the max number of open files. All right, so we've covered tasks, we've covered variables. The third and final thing you'll find in playbooks is handlers. Handlers are normally around services, so quite often around sort of web servers and Elasticsearch for us. And a handler is basically something you can call to say, can you please make sure you restart? Not necessarily now, because I'm about to run 17 other tasks, and there's probably another bit going to happen over here. But by the end of this play, I need you to restart it, otherwise I know you're not going to be in the right state. So here there's a task that updates an Apache config file, and there's a little notify statement at the end of the task saying, once I'm done, make sure we restart Apache at some point in the future. And then further down our playbook, we've defined a handler. We've said, here is how you restart Apache, and it's again just a call to an Ansible module. It's saying, take the service module, there's the name of the service, and make sure it's in the restarted state, so it's at least been shut down and brought back up again once during this play. So putting it all back together, there's our example playbook. Again, we've got the user login at the top, we've got variables, we've got tasks, we've got handlers. And when we go ahead and execute that from the command line, you should get a nice output like that. So first thing it does is it goes off and gathers facts, which I'll cover in a couple of slides. And then it runs the tasks, and it'll tell you they've changed, stuff changed. That's the notified call is the handler running and saying, okay, I'm restarting. And then you get a recap at the bottom that everything went okay and there were 3 changes. If you were to run this again, those change commands would turn into just okays because it's already been done. They don't need to do it again. Oh yeah, so that's the output you might normally see. It occurred to me that it wouldn't be a complete talk on Ansible if I didn't mention Calce. If you haven't got Calce, you should install it on Unix. It'll make your life awesome. And Ansible loves cows, and they love cows. So if you've got it installed by default, the output you'll see actually will look a little bit more like this. Which at work we didn't have it, so I got the previous output. Then I tried this out at home. I'm like, where have these cows come from? But yeah, as you go around the Ansible blog and material, you'll find cows everywhere. They seem to be their mascot now. So, I mean, that alone, I pretty much have my server built with what I've shown you so far. So a lot of material from now in is just little refinements, little refactorings I've made, and kind of, oh, that makes it a bit neater. A couple of slightly more advanced things to do with plays, not that advanced, but so here, for instance, I had a playbook to compile Ruby from source. So we, of course, need to still build essential package. Oh, and we need to still get curl package and the curl package. I believe there are about 18 packages you need to store Ruby. This can get quite verbose. So there is a looping construct where you can basically say with items, which creates an item variable. And for each of the things in the list, it's just going to run that app module over and over again and install all the apps you need. So it's just a nice way of drying up repetitive tasks. There's also conditionals. I think we might use only one place of the play, but I imagine because we're only on a single server, I imagine if you've got many servers with lots of different architectures, you might use conditionals a little bit more. Here's a stupid example where we've got a variable awesome set to true, and we're going to run this shell task to echo out this machine is awesome whenever awesome set to true. A slightly more useful example is we might just want to shut down Debian-flavored systems, no other systems. We're not quite sure why. So again, you've got this command module to go and shut them down, and we're only doing it when the Ansible OS family is Debian. So again, that's just another variable. The difference between those two examples is that second one, Ansible OS family, is a bit of kind of an interesting variable, and it's actually a default one that gets set for you, along with about 200 others whenever you run them. So when you see at the start of executing a play, it says gathering facts. These are the facts it's gathering. And it sets lots and lots of system-specific material, architectures, BIOSes, packages, processors, all the disks, any sort of system information you might want, they will have given you a variable for it. So yeah, we don't use a lot of this. I saw the bundler Gems talk yesterday, and they're talking about doing multi-threaded bundle installs. And I thought, that'd be kind of cool to do on our deployment, but we don't know how many cores we've got, except we do, because we have Ansible processor cores. So I'm now thinking I'd go back in my play, add that in, and the multi-core machines can use multi-core bundler, and that would be pretty cool. So yeah, machine facts are there, very handy, and we deploy to the cloud as well, up to AWS, and if you do that, you get a whole bunch of extra facts around your cloud machine and where it's at, what elastic IP is, so there's lots of useful stuff there. Right, so structure. So far, what I've shown you has been a big blob of YAML, and a big blob of YAML will work, and it does get you quite far. But then that big blob of YAMLs had temp tasks, variables. We could have inventory variables sitting off in a separate inventory file. There's files and templates as well. I didn't really cover those, but they'll obviously generally be in their own directory nearby. And handlers. And you'll have something a bit like that. So you've got your big playbook and a few files, a few templates knocking around. So there's nicer ways of splitting it out than that. So for instance, here we've moved all the tasks which you've had so far into a separate file, into tasks, Apache YAML. Just put them there, same as just copy and paste straight out. And then back in our playbook, we can just use an include command, say, yep, can you grab that Apache and just put it into place. Fairly obvious stuff. And also fairly obviously, you can kind of do the same with variables and handlers. You can put them in separate files and just include them, which already kind of shrinks your playbook up a bit and moves these things around. Where you've got variables in your inventory file, that's not a bad way of doing it, but sometimes they can get a little bit hidden in there, so you can actually extract them out as well.
If you've got a host-specific variable, you can move it up into a host-specific file. So you normally put that in the host files directory. That's like there's a sort of best practice default, so it's Ansible's always going to go off and look in host vars, and if it's deploying to a host called devhost1, it will just make sure those variables have been loaded. And similarly, there's a group files directory, so if it knows you're deploying to a server which is part of the small group, it's going to bring in the small group variables. I'm supposed to react, am I? So that's a good way of drawing up your variables and keeping them a little bit more obviously on the system as there's files they're explicitly named after the servers they affect. So all that structuring is helpful. After my pun. All that structuring is kind of helpful, but it's, there's a step further you can go, and this is something we only discovered kind of a few months ago was roles, which is basically, I think this is the Ansible's encouraged way of making useful, deployable, reusable chunks of Ansible, basically. So as I say, yes, an automatic way of automatically loading certain variables, tasks, and handlers based on a known file structure. So that's where we've got to so far with our restructuring. We've now got a playbook, we've got files and templates directory, and we've got handlers, tasks, and vars with some YAML files in them. That's pretty good, but it can be better. If you move all those into a roles directory, and then under roles you have the name of your role, in this case Apache directory, and then under that we have files, handlers, tasks, templates, vars. And we rename all the YAMLs over to main.yaml, which again is another convention. If main.yaml's there, Ansible's just going to find it and it's just going to run it. We've now created a role, an Apache role. So like I say, when that role is executed, it will look for tasks main.yaml and vars main.yaml, ensure they've been loaded in. Obviously, you can use any handlers in handlers main.yaml. And equally, if any of those tasks refer to files and templates, it will automatically look in the files and templates of that role, as well as the files and templates in the root directory if you've still got any there. And that's really all a role is. But once you've got that, you can go back to your playbook, which is already shrinking pretty nicely. And now it's beautiful. It's tiny. And it's really simple. Why that's important is because by the time you finish doing all of this, you'll find your playbook looks a little bit more like this, which is still small and tiny and beautiful, but slightly more useful to us now. As a quick note, we mentioned earlier tasks you can execute depending on variables. Well, roles you can also execute based on variables. So here we've got a whole role around Debian packages we only want to run for the Debian machines. If they're not Debian, we can just skip over that and go elsewhere. So that's roles. Like I say, they're not rocket science. They're more just following a best practice. So once you've done that, the final thing I always want to cover is there's a general sort of best practice for laying out your code anyway. These again are just nice little extra things we've picked up as we've gone along. The first thing is site.yaml is the kind of default top level playbook. If there's one of those, I think Ansible Playbook would just go off and run it. And by default, site.yaml will you'll want to put in all your plays, so your web server playbook and your database playbook. So you can just go and say Ansible or site.yaml and it should go off and do everything. Secondly, we haven't done this, and I have sort of had to Control-C really excitedly a couple of points because of it. It's good to keep your production inventory file separate from your staging and demonstration inventory file. Otherwise, when you type Ansible or go off and do, no, not the production. So yeah, separate files is quite handy. One of the reasons we haven't done that is we use Amazon EC2, and there is actually a nice little sort of clever, you can do dynamic inventory where it actually runs a little Python script, but you don't need to see the Python. And that gives you lots of dynamic, it gives you a dynamic inventory file based off your EC2 configuration, which is kind of cool, but I'm not sure how we can then tell it to split off the production part. I'm figuring that out. But if you're certainly just writing manual inventory files, keep them separate. Again, we covered that a minute ago. You've got your group vars and your host vars. They should be named by the specific group or specific host you're looking at. And then finally, everything else should be split into roles and kept out of the top level playbook. And once you've got that, you've got a pretty good Ansible play, and you've pretty much got your first step into Ansible server provisioning. So, like I say, that pretty much covers the first step. That's what, for the year we've been using, that's got us from our Snowflake server, our random scraps of wiki and shell script, up to we now have a repeatable build. We can build our Ubuntu 12 machine with all the bells and whistles, and as we're doing upgrades, we're now just running the script over and over again, slowly refining where we've done our own DIY idempotency by using that creates command. There's been a couple of shifts we had to do there, but broadly speaking, it's it's been easy. It's been a first simple step. There are those who've sort of challenged us and said, well, you know, shouldn't you be using Chef? Shouldn't you be using Puppet? You know, rest of the company using this. And I figure it's been so easy to adopt this anyway and to then formalize and script up how we produce our server, even if we then want to take a step into Chef or Puppet. I think this has already been a worthwhile exercise and just, like I say, formalising what was already scrappy documentation. But so far, Ansible has not disappointed. It seems to have a lot more power that I haven't even managed to explore yet. And they're pretty good. The release schedule is every 2 months. There's a new version. And they're pretty active on GitHub. I think it is the 4th most active repo of last year, just behind Rails. So it's a pretty active project. So final thing, I just want to cover off a few resources, a few things I found really handy in sort of getting to know and understand Ansible. But before I do, again, something more around Ansible's relevance. This is the new ThoughtWorks radar, and lurking, sliding all the way into trial is Ansible at number 50. And ThoughtWorks had a rather lovely thing to say about it, I guess. So yeah, I think ThoughtWorks seem to like it. Works quite well for them. But resources, documentation is great. It is fantastic. And like I say, we do a new release every 2 months, and the documentation's got updated every 2 months. Ansible, in fact, went through a rebrand a month ago. They used to be Ansible Works. They are now just Ansible. Had to redo all my slides. But the new documentation's even better. But it's very accurate, very up to date, and it's on GitHub. So if you see a mistake, you can go and do a pull request and fix it. Ansible Weekly is a really good newsletter by Matt James, and again, he's got down with that cow thing. He also wrote a short ebook which was taste testing and server provisioning, which I read, and it's very good, and that's quite helpful. That sort of summarises all the different server provisioning systems and what got me into trying Ansible. But like I say, this weekly newsletter he publishes has lots of good links. So I was using obviously quite a few to help me build my talks or other people's slideshows. I even saw there's a couple of talks coming up in Australia I was quite excited about, but they were both mine. But that was still pretty cool. And Ansible Galaxy is an interesting new experiment by Ansible, I guess. It's a place to go and take your roles, so these reusable chunks of Ansible, and upload your roles so that other people might make use of them. I haven't played with it much. Some feedback's been mixed so far. Some people seem to like it, some are not quite so convinced. But I think it's early days yet, and certainly once we've got something solid, I think it'd be worth trying to submit it up there, and equally just looking around and seeing how other people are doing it, and if there's any best practices I missed out on so far. I think with that, I am done. So thank you very much.
A couple of minutes. Yep, Tim got his hand up first. You win.
G'day.
Hello.
I'm a recovering Chef user, and I have to Chef production stacks a lot, and I always feel really nervous if I haven't touched a production stack for a while, re-chefing it, because Chef is a declarative style of telling where you want your server to be, but you're never really sure what it's going to do until you run it.
Yeah.
With Ansible, is there like a way to dry run your actual playbooks?
There's a dry run command, certainly, which will say, based on what this server's at and based on what I think you need, I'm going to try and do all this stuff. I haven't played with it very much, but yeah, I think there's definitely a couple of commands to do that.
Thanks.
No worries.
Yes.
It's kind of related to Tim's question, but I'm curious whether you've come across any tools for testing your playbooks.
No, and it's interesting. I've given this talk twice now on the same question card, and I thought that'd be really useful. No, at the moment we run it in demonstration, and then our testing is we then prod demonstration. If it doesn't fall over, it looks like it's going to work. So yeah, could be better. But yeah, I haven't seen any testing tools around. Like I say, because it's mainly configuration, I don't know how easy the testing is going to be, but presumably there must be some tools out there.
So do you roll those playbooks? Do you roll the servers forward using updated playbooks, or do you find this easier, or the alternative, sort of blowing servers away and starting from scratch?
Currently I think we still treat our servers a bit, what's the phrase, a bit more like pets rather than cattle. So yeah, we just upgrade them using Ansible. I think we're in the cloud, so we are moving towards more of a let's just throw that one away, get a new one. But for now, yeah, we use upgrades.
All right, cool, thanks.
No worries.
Matt.
soon be on. Yep, awesome. You stole my question, so to just touch on it, we use Vagrant to pretty much test out all our playbooks, and when we're happy, we just put them up onto EC2 or wherever they're meant to be. So, different question for you, Ben.
Oh, good.
Okay, try and think one.
If you're going to heckle, you've got to prepare.
Yeah, okay, good question for you. One of the things I do like about Chef and having a sort of separate master server there is you can say constantly poll the actual master server and have Chef run every 15 minutes, 20 minutes. Is there an equivalent in Ansible?
There might be. Again, looking through documentation, I've just seen the heading. I haven't read through that bit. There's something called Ansible pull, which I suspect is the sort of equivalent of trying to do that approach. Yeah. So I think I saw something about. I think I saw a beta flag somewhere near it. So it's probably quite new. But like I say, it's quite rapidly developed. It could be solid by now. Yeah, I'm guessing that would probably do something like what you're after.
One quick question. In cases where you're trying to check out code, for example, and there's stuff like SSH asking you if you want to accept your key. So commands that needs input from the user. Is there a way to provide that with Ansible?
Well, certainly with...
Or will it just hang?
Or when you SSH in and it says, oh, I don't recognize this server, do you want to trust the key? Then yeah, you can actually just manually input yes at that point. But yeah, so things like passwords and pseudo passwords, that's why you've got the options to provide them. Otherwise, yeah, it does just hang. So I was playing a bit on my local machine and I was just sitting there and it wasn't running. And finally I figured out, yeah, because I need a password to sudo. And as soon as you provide that, it just runs. But yes, it does hang and it is a bit annoying when it's happening. Because you're like, are you doing anything?
One more. Yep, here. One more. Yeah.
Today. I've seen another sort of lightning talk on Ansible, and they similarly talked about like how quick it was to kind of get things going and stuff. I was just wondering, do you know of any major or minor things that like you could do in Chef or Puppet or something that Ansible doesn't really cover? Or?
Haven't found them yet. I'm sure there are. I mean, like I say, having spoke to ops guys about this, the question of pull rather than push came out a bit. I mean, they'll talk about Puppet setups where they'll just bring new nodes on who automatically go and refresh themselves, and people who like the idea that if someone goes in and monkeys with a config file, that client's going to go and talk to the Puppet master and go, no, change it back. Whereas Ansible's not going to do that. Ansible's in its default mode and go out there, set the server up, and if you go and change it manually, you're an idiot. So whether that's a good or a bad thing, I don't know. So I guess, yeah, that's one area where certainly people have sort of said, does Ansible do something similar? And I don't know yet. It certainly is quick to get up and running, and I think that, I mean, as a Ruby on Rails team, that's be something we embrace for our code, and I think we've really embraced it for Ansible. I'd say within 2 days, we had 90% of our server coded up, and then it was most of the rest of the time, we just finding those little things we'd missed out, like, oh yeah, we haven't set up the mail server, no wonder no emails are going out. In demonstration, just to be clear.
Thanks. Any more, team? Yeah, one more. Anyone got another question? Last one. Anyone?
Oh,
hold on.
Yeah, Ansible's pull isn't really like Chef server mode.
Oh, good.
It just will pull from a repo.
Okay.
So that's it. It's not.
Yes, forget
intelligent node matching and that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
All right, let's thanks Ben.
Thank you very much.